All right, so that was a change that has taken 34 years to put into action. What are its implications, especially for the current schooling system? I have with me Ashish Dhawan, Chairman and Board of Trustees of Ashoka University, and Dr. Madhav Chavan, co-founder of the Pratham Education Foundation. Welcome to both of you. Let me get straight to it. Mr. Dhawan, how do you see the changes? And the first question I asked Dr. Kasturi Rangan was, how does this impact the current structure? Because there is a lot that is new. It's an overhaul. It's not an incremental change. You're talking about medium of instruction changing for the first 5 years. You're talking about the whole 10+2 structure turned on its head.
Yeah, clearly this is a landmark policy, and the last one was in 1986. So, this will be around for at least the next couple of decades. I think there are some seminal aspects to this. I mean, apart from the curricular structure, which you pointed out, the 10+2, I think what that curricular structure really calls out is the primacy of foundational numeracy and literacy, early learning and the primacy of foundational numeracy and literacy in the first 5 years. We know children are not able to master basic skills. And so it's very important that we focus on foundational learning. I think a second is around data and being able to measure. I think the policy talks about setting up a national assessment center, PARAK, so that we have reliable data, we can define goals and then achieve those goals. We have to achieve this national mission for foundational numeracy and literacy by 2025. I think a third is around restructuring board exams, which I know may take longer, but it's fundamental because a lot sort of cascades down from the board exams, getting the board exams to test more core concepts and application of knowledge. And finally, I think on the school education side, it's about, as is laid out, light and tight regulation, which is greater self-disclosure, but at the same time, accountability. But a level playing field between public and private schools, because we do have a large private school system in India. As of a year ago, 47.5% of children go to some form of private school, aided or unaided. And, there is no quality assurance of these schools. At the same time, there's a license Raj operating in this sector. So I think there's some very fundamental issues that are called out from a school education perspective.
It's a plan that sounds great on paper. Dr. Chavan, my question is how will you implement it without disrupting what is actually working in some pockets, especially on the question of language of instruction? The whole system is skewed towards wanting and aspiring for an English-based education. I mean, that's the truth. And whether it's right or wrong is a completely different question. Are we looking at changing that completely? Is that the sense you get?
Well, first of all, I don't know whether you can call this a plan. I think you have to treat it as a policy. This is a policy. And policy guides the action and plans of the government or of the society in general. So this policy is going to be a guide to what is going to happen. Specifically about this language, when I saw it, I was a little confused. Whether they are going to say that all English medium schools have to stop teaching in English and everything has to become a state language. I doubt whether the governments will be able to do that. It's not only a popular demand, but it's even a simple feasibility thing that you cannot do that. I doubt whether that can be done. What I think it is possible is that the states, they have given emphasis on regional languages. I think instead of saying cut down the English or stop teaching in English, what is important is to lay an emphasis on regional languages and build strengthen the regional language literature, the resources in regional languages. For example, you were talking to Dr. Kasturi Rangan about the digital initiatives. We find that while you can get a substantial amount of digital resources in Hindi, you can't get the same in Odia, for example. You cannot get the same thing in Assamese. Pratham has been trying to develop these resources in different languages, but we find that these resources are not supported. So I think what the government needs to do is strengthen the regional initiatives, regional languages, and so on, rather than cutting down English medium. I'm not particularly in favor of doing English medium education from the early stages for children whose parents don't speak English at home. And this madness about wanting to be in English medium schools something has to be done. And it is not going to happen by any way of compulsion. So we'll have to figure out exactly what is the way. Perhaps what is possible is the guideline of building the preschool years, 3 years into the early childhood years, the 5-year plan, 3-year, whatever, what is that? 3 years of preschool and 2 years of school. If they build a strong base at that point, then maybe you'll be able to persuade parents to put them in regional language schools and then build the English learning later on at some point. So I think that is a point of confusion for me, whether that is what the government's intentions are. I doubt whether those are the intentions, but we'll have to wait and watch and see.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's going to be very difficult to even implement or uproot a structure that has been going on for some time. Another very interesting aspect, Mr. Dhawan, and I'd like you to come in on this, is what happens post 12th standard. And they talk about doing away with these compartments between arts and science, having a broader sort of view for these courses. How would that really work when we're moving towards a time of specialization?
Yeah, so I think we set up Ashoka University with really the vision of multidisciplinary and holistic education, breadth and depth. And I do believe that that is the right direction for higher education in India. We do need some degree of specialization. So what the policy does, it calls out multiple entry and exit points. So if you're getting a 3-year or a 4-year undergraduate degree, you need a strong foundation in terms of diverse subjects and to have some degree of choice, because you may not know, you may be a strong math science student, but you may not know that what you really want to study is computer science or what you want to study is economics. And so I think having some degree of choice, being exposed to different ways of thinking, I think is really critical. And then at some point, students can specialize. I don't think the purpose of an undergraduate education is specialization per se. And even in a world of AI and data science, I can tell you computer science and AI are becoming more of a horizontal. So it's the CS plus X or AI plus X. It's AI applied to healthcare, AI applied to education, AI applied to a variety of different fields, environmental data. And so it's at the intersection of disciplines where new knowledge is getting created. And so I think it's very important for students. One is to have choice. Two is to have a broad education, to be able to think critically, to be creative as is laid out in the policy. And finally, to pick an area that appeals to them and get some degree of specialization. All we're talking about is you'll now take fewer courses, maybe 15 in your major, as opposed to all your courses in your major. So I think you'll still get significant depth in the discipline.
Are we moving towards more of a system like we see in America or in the UK or in Europe? Mr. Dhawan, if you look at the overall direction, moving away from a very typical Indian educational system which focused on memorizing large amounts of information in a very set order, do you get the sense that this is a huge attempt to break away from that stranglehold?
I think so. I think the policy talks about it again and again, even in whether it's in school or particularly in college. This idea of moving away from rote form of education, rote learning, and creating an education that's not only more holistic, but is more learner-centered, more inquiry-based, and really develops the 21st century student skills in students. So I don't think the 21st century is necessarily about specialization. I think it's important to have in college certain fundamental skills that are developed to learn how to think critically, to be able to communicate well, write well, communicate well orally, to be able to deal with ambiguity and to connect the dots between different disciplines, to be able to develop a love for learning, because you're going to be a lifelong learner for the next 40, 50 years. And so I think having a pedagogy that's different, and this is at the heart of the Ashoka model, not just the breadth and the choice, but it's a pedagogy that's not sage on stage. It's a pedagogy where you read, you come to class, and class is much more of a discussion, and you learn to think for yourself, you learn to listen to others, and through that process, that sort of Socratic method, you develop a better understanding of the world around you.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Chavan, this is a question I asked Dr. Kasturi Rangan as well. The kind of educational system that Mr. Dhawan is describing is something that a very small number of institutions provide currently in India, and in a lot of cases they're extremely elite, expensive ones. The idea is to make this available for everyone. My question to you is, do we have the capacity to do this in any defined time frame? This means uprooting very old fixed ideas in the minds of educators as well.
Well, you see, you have to make a beginning somewhere. I don't know whether, if we don't expect this to happen next year, in the next 5 years. We have to make a move away from the rote learning methodologies that we were doing. And I think the way to do it is typically, I think what Dr. Kasturi Rangan was also talking about, the example that he gave, was based on goal setting. So if you decide that you want to launch a satellite in a few years, there's a famous example of John Kennedy saying by the end of the decade, they would put a man on the moon. And then the whole country or the resources are mobilized for it. Or we have done it in India. Rajiv Gandhi did that as well. So if we were to set up goals, and these goals are being set up now, that we want to change the examination system. So when you say we are going to change the examination system, then everything starts falling in place, because that is the one key point on which everybody's attention is focused. And the interesting thing is they're saying now 10th standard exam is going to be low stakes. What does that mean? That means it doesn't have to be all the glorious things that we were talking about. It only means don't worry about it too much. You finish your 10 years of learning, and then the ones who are really going to worry about are the ones who are going to go for competitive examinations. They're going to go look for professional colleges. But large majority of the students are really not interested in that. They're not going to go up here for IIT exams and medical exams and all that. You should have the vertical pathway to go to those specializations and high education. But that doesn't mean you should start doing it right now. So I think if you set goals, and if this policy is planned, translated into a plan, then maybe we can make progress at some steps at a time. And the question is whether we have the patience to do that, whether we know how to do that, and is there an atmosphere favorable for that? The other big thing in this policy document, I've not seen the document, I've seen the press briefing thing. There is this mention of, maybe you're going to talk about it later on, the 6% GDP. This has been the dream since 1966. Are we actually going to get there? And are we going to be able to mobilize the financial resources? If we can mobilize financial resources, many things can happen, but that is not the only thing that will happen. So I think now the intent has been declared. The education policy draft was sitting with the government for some years. Now it is out there and the government has declared the intent to follow up. Well, if that happens and we actually see it coming down in the plan, because this is a hard year, we know that we've gone through a lot of difficulties. The economic situation is going to be hard for some time to come. So I guess we'll have to make, I think some goals that have been set are very good. For example, 2025 is a deadline for achieving foundational literacy and numeracy at the end of the third grade. If that can be achieved, it doesn't really require a lot of money. It requires only a mindset change. It doesn't require a whole lot of rocket science and no rocket science whatsoever. It is a simple thing that is to be done in every school around the country. If we can achieve that, then we will have a sense of achievement. And when you have small senses of achievement, small successes, you can build bigger successes. You don't have to worry about what is going to happen in 2030. Build something for the next 3 years, and then you can go for the next 7 years also. That's the way to go.
No, absolutely. But, I want to sort of get a sense on where and how large the gap is between what is being envisioned and what is the current situation. I think that's important as well. Mr. Dhawan, in a pandemic year, we are seeing a large number of, Indian students going without any access to education if they don't have a power, internet connection, a device, etc. How do you fill that gap? Where are you going to bring the teachers who know how to do all of this? And at the end of the day, a lot of Indians educate themselves in the aspiration of a great job or a better life. Does this kind of an educational structure lead them down that path?
Yeah, so I think you've been asking a lot about the doability of this. And I'd say, firstly, I want to thank the government, the minister, the secretaries, the PMO, for actually getting this approved. This new education policy, at least in terms of intent, is a landmark document. It's historic. I think now, in terms of doability, I think you have to segregate some things. Like Madhav mentioned, the 6% of GDP being spent on education. I think that's aspirational. We're not going to get there anytime soon. We don't have the fiscal space to do it. There are, other things that will also be very difficult around. We've envisioned things around teachers, which is the right thing in terms of building up teachers, making this aspirational to get the top students to become teachers. Again, that's aspirational. It'll take a long time. But I agree with what Madhav said, and I would point out 4 or 5 areas which I think we can make a lot of progress on. The first and foremost, I completely agree with Madhav, is by 2025, foundational numeracy and literacy. If this is the one thing we can achieve, it'll be a real sense of accomplishment. And by the way, this would be a huge accomplishment. The World Bank says that India is at 55% learning poverty, which means out of 125 million children in primary school, about 65, 70 million are falling behind. This would be huge. We put them on a different life trajectory. So that's number one. 2 is, if we want to achieve this, we need to have the right data system, right learning marker, etc. And Parak, I think we can set up a national assessment center. Very doable, doesn't cost money, very doable. I think we can start making some tweaks to the board exam system. Already it's been envisioned. I see it with CBSE. There's a plan for the coming year, the following year. We can take this nationwide, costs no money at all. And as Madhav mentioned, it actually does cascade down. The signal sent by that is very, very powerful. I think another one is around this idea of, lighter touch, light but tight regulation, as they call it. Get rid of the license Raj, let people self-disclose, and hold them accountable on that basis. The idea of a single regulator in higher ed, I think, is fantastic. An online self-disclosure, again, doesn't cost any money at all. I think this idea of graded autonomy, we have 45,000 colleges in India that are affiliated to universities. In phases, take the top ones first, liberate them. Why should LSR or SRCC or some of the top colleges in India not be given greater autonomy? It will create an incentive for them to scale up and to improve, etc. So I think there are so many of these. The setting up of a national research foundation, just to even aggregate some of the money we spend through DST, DBT. But even aside from that, some strategic areas we can prioritize. If AI is important, quantum computing, bioscience, let's put some money behind that through and if we want to build research universities, we don't need large amounts of money, but a few thousand crore will make a big difference in terms of stimulating the ecosystem. So I think these are all very, very doable things within a 5-year time period.
Absolutely.
Hello?
No, there is a lot that can be done, no doubt. And I think one big favorite and one very popular one is going to be no stress board exams, especially in 10th. If that happens, that would just be fantastic. And, we can only wish we had that kind of an opportunity back in the day. I want to thank both of you for joining us on this very, very important subject, the big story this evening on the show. We'll take a very short break, but don't go away, because when we come back, we're going to look in great detail at the results of a Sero study in Mumbai, which has shown that up to 57% of people living in Mumbai slums are already showing COVID-19 antibodies. The estimate is about 40% for the whole city. Are we heading towards herd immunity? That story coming up next.